Hey there friends, hope you all had a great Independence Day yesterday. I wanted to put out this quick video breaking apart a video that I put out a couple days ago. The video was 35 minutes long. I know a lot of you don't have time to watch a video that long, but there was a lot of really good information in there. So I felt the need, in order to get that information out in smaller bite-sized pieces, I would break that video up into smaller sections. This first one that you're about to see is my motive classification method, the MCM, motive classification method. This is a system that I developed. Figure everybody else can invent their own stuff, like the Gun Violence Archive invents their own definition of what a quote mass shooting is. So I felt like I needed to make some clarification so people would understand how I'm arriving at the accurate representation of that same Gun Violence Archive database. They purposely put all of these things into one bucket to try to get the American people to panic and to think that we have an epidemic, as they like to call it. They would lead you to believe that we had 72, quote, mass shootings, essentially a rampage killing, as I properly call them, 72 of them in June. We had 2. Not saying 2 is okay, but 2 is not 72. First, guys, go check out my friends, Mission First Tactical. That's Mission First Tactical. These guys have some incredible stuff. Personally, my favorite is a new Acro CCW bags. These bags are freaking awesome. They have a very subtle look to them. They don't have an overly tactical appeal to them. So even if you are carrying, it's not going to make you stand out, if you know what I mean. They also have their brand new translucent EXD magazines. These things are unbelievable. A little bit more detail on those in a future video you'll have coming up from me. And also backup iron sights. These are some legitimate backup iron sights. These are metal, not those cheap plastic ones that you see from some of the guys out there. And then they have tons of other things like gun parts and holsters. Check them out. MissionFirstTactical.com. Again, MissionFirstTactical.com. Use my discount code FTATF. Again, my world famous discount code of FTATF will get you money off at the time of checkout. So guys, the first thing I want to do is I want to break down and provide a little bit of clarity on the different types of shootings. As the Gun Violence Archive incorrectly does, they throw all of these shootings into one bucket because it gives it a sexy feel for what the mainstream media and politicians are looking at, and especially the anti-gun enterprise on the left. It gives them what they're looking for to be able to drive memberships, to gain money, make money, to present anti-gun laws. It fabricates numbers using actual numbers, so there's a hint of factual data in there, but it's all represented improperly, so that makes it still a lie, even though actual numbers build up the numbers and make the numbers and create the quote mass shooting numbers. The numbers that build that are factual. It's actual things that happened and they're not made up. But to give the impression that we have this crazy epidemic of people running around through schools, churches, synagogues, grocery stores, and just randomly shooting a bunch of people at any given moment at every time of the day is just an outright lie. In fact, to imply that is a lie in and of itself, even though you're using factual data. What I wanted to do, because there may be some new viewers watching, and I want to provide this sense of clarity a little bit better so everybody understands my thinking behind separating these shootings into the categories that I do, which I think are the correct categories. I call my method the motive classification method. I start out with the bulk of what we have, which is confrontational attacks. And I'm calling these attacks because, let's face it guys, these can still be, I think, an attack and something that maybe somebody doesn't die, right? It could be with a knife. The lady who stabbed and I say lady, why am I calling this thing a lady? The person that stabbed the 3-year-old boy in the face and the back and killed him, again, that was done with a knife. I considered that an attack. It certainly wasn't a shooting, but it was random. And I would put it in the classification of what I'm doing here. So again, understand my method of thinking. I'm really big on motive, not means. Again, motive, not means. I don't care what they use. I care what they were thinking when they decided to take a human life. So let's go through these. A confrontational attack makes up the lion's share of what we see every month. However, most of us are not in any real danger. They are sparked by a fight, disagreement, grievance, or retaliation. The attacker knows or knows of the person or group they attack, even if they just met. bystanders usually are only at risk of stray bullets. In other words, the bystanders are typically not the target, although innocent bystanders get hit because these guys can't aim and they're randomly firing their little Glock switches and other little guns off just randomly in the air in the general direction of whoever they're shooting, having a shootout with. They typically occur at late night or early morning hours. I don't mean when some of us are fishing. I mean when some of us are sleeping, like 2 a.m. in the morning. Location is not planned unless it's retaliation. In other words, they are not going to locations hoping something pops off. They go to street parties, house parties, block parties. They they're selling dope, they're selling drugs, they're selling firearms, stolen firearms. They're doing all kinds of things between criminal activity and just partying, and they meet up with people, egos get involved, and they're usually drunk or high or just stupid, and they have disagreements, and of course with their egos involved, they can't just walk away and they can't talk their way out of it, so they start shooting at each other. That location was not planned. Now, the reason why I say retaliation is if somebody shot at them. Well, most of these shootings, a lot of them, are retaliation for something that happened a few days earlier when they were shot at. So the location might be planned simply because your target is at that location and that's why they went there. But again, they know the person they're going there to shoot. This is not random. They come from mostly fatherless homes and have no immediate mentor figure in the area or community. Suspects are rarely apprehended, and in many cases you're going to see, especially in these gun violence archive numbers that I break down, you'll see where I mentioned that nobody is talking. What that usually means is there's a shootout, everybody knows everybody knows who did it, but nobody talks. Nobody will say who did it because they're afraid to get shot too. So the suspects are rarely apprehended in these cases unless somebody will rat them out. But they are usually known, just rarely ratted out. And they may experience narcissistic personality disorder from the DSM-5, mostly ego-driven. That's an actual classifiable disorder in the DSM-5 book. So I want to make it very clear that I'm not just saying a lot of this stuff on hunches. A lot of what you're going to see with some of these people are clinically documented things that's wrong in the brain. The narcissistic personality disorder is just something where people can't let things go sometimes. Again, mostly ego driven, but there are some other factors that play into that too. Not saying everybody suffers from that does this, but that's certainly a component. And it's not like they're mentally ill and crazy or whatever. That's just a component from an ego standpoint that sometimes won't let, especially the younger people, let things go or walk away. The next one I want to talk about that we see more often than we should is the domestic attacks. They are not random. The victims are known, obviously. There's domestic things that happen amongst family members, so they obviously know their victims, and the victims usually know the attackers. The attacker rarely attacks those outside the family circle unless it's a bystander that is trying to intervene. That's typically the only time you're going to see any kind of innocent bystander, or maybe you see a stray bullet hit an innocent bystander. But because of where these things typically happen at, inside the home, you're usually not going to get innocent bystanders that are attacked or hit. Attacker usually takes their own life. In many cases, you're going to notice, especially in these GVA numbers that I break down, if I classify it as a domestic shooting, in a, let's say the majority of cases, you're going to notice that after they take their family members' lives, they usually take their own lives. The time of the attack is not specific. Of course, it's going to be when people are home, so you may see a few more of these happen in the afternoons and later in the evenings, but there is no specific time. This could happen in the middle of the day if the spouses or partners attacking each other are at home at the same time. They mostly occur in the home, obviously. This is usually where things pop off, and that's usually where something happens. Even if it's ex-spouses, usually they go to the home of the other one, and that's where they commit their act of atrocity. There are many different personality disorders. There's not one particular one in this case that you can tie to this particular type of shooter. There's not that. It's more emotion driven, things that happen between two people. It could be everything from finances to infidelity to a number of other things that play into that. I mean, it's hard to raise a family, obviously. The next one is Rampage Attacks. This is the one that the mainstream media would like you to believe that is happening very frequently, because this one is unpredictable, and this would truly put fear in the hearts of Americans everywhere, because we don't know when these can pop up. They are random, not like the other ones. These are random. The victims are mostly unknown. The attacker does not always know who he's going to shoot. In some cases, some of these people start out their rampage killing at home. So some cases you're going to see them shoot their mom, their aunt, their sister, or somebody like that that might be there, who maybe try to stop them from leaving and going to commit this crime. So sometimes you see that, but that's not usually where it stops. Obviously, they're trying to leave the house to go commit a rampage killing, and again, in that case, their targets are not known. Everyone present is a target and in danger. No one is safe. That means these people are looking for a high body count. They don't care who they kill. They are trying to kill as many people as possible. They don't care how old. They don't care how young. They don't care what color you are. They don't care what you say, how you look, or how you dress. They are looking for a beating heart, and they want to stop those beating hearts. So they don't care about that. No one is safe in the presence of a true rampage attacker. The attacker seeks a high body count. Location chosen for that reason. In other words, gun-free zones. That's why they go to these places, because they want a high body count. Not spontaneous. The attack is planned in advance. Many times we see the evidence of this in the way of manifestos, journals, diaries, whichever, that they are planning these out for extended periods of time, and they finally decide to carry them out. Obviously, gang members don't do that. They don't sit there and write a diary and plan out to go kill Rodney down at the tennis courts at 2 a.m. in the morning 3 months from now. That just doesn't happen. The attacker expects to die during the attack by others or by their own hand. I'm not saying that they want to die, but they expect to get shot during that attack, and in some cases, if nobody does, they take their own lives. You rarely see a true rampage attacker or rampage killer who survives and is locked up and apprehended without having their life taken or taking their own. Usually happens during busy time of day. The reason for that, again, high body count. They're not attacking Rodney at the tennis courts at 2 a.m. in the morning. That's simply not where they're going to do it, because there's usually not hundreds or thousands of people there. They're attacking malls, churches, restaurants, things of that nature that are going to have lots of people at peak times of the day, because again, the high body count is what they seek. They usually attack in a gun-free zone for less resistance. We've seen memoirs, we've seen manifestos, we've seen diaries and journals that have specifically said that. More recently, the Nashville shooter, who said they chose this school because it was a gun-free zone and they knew they would meet resistance in other areas that were not gun-free zones. They typically come from a broken home. They typically come from a broken home. You've seen that in my book, How to Make a Monster. Usually the home life is not the greatest. Some of these people will dispute this and say that, oh no, our home life was great, but in many cases it obviously was not, if you scratch the surface a little bit. Psychotropic drugs are usually involved. Mood-altering drugs of some sort were likely in theirs, and that's going to drive that depression even more and make them manic, make them suicidal, make them homicidal, especially if they're trying to get themselves off of it and they quit cold turkey. Sometimes it makes those side effects a lot worse when you get off of these drugs. It can actually make it worse than if you were never on them to begin with. Mental state, unstable, usually already being treated. Again, whether it be therapy or medication, they are typically on somebody's radar somewhere, from either a psychiatry place, a mental institution, or just somebody who does therapy or maybe prescribes drugs for depression or whatnot, but they are usually documented somewhere from having something. Finally, they suffer from antisocial personality disorder. Again, this is a documented condition in the DSM-5 book. Very important that you understand that these people have something wrong with them in their brain. Not just the fact that they are kind of goofy or silly or different than everybody else. They suffer from an actual diagnosis that's in the DSM-5. And finally, a newer category that I started putting in here is law enforcement. This is not because I believe it belongs here. It's because the Gun Violence Archive incorrectly has started to include law enforcement related shootings in with what they're calling mass shootings. To me, that's just outright stupid. If somebody has, I don't know, maybe they're on the run from law enforcement because they committed a crime. We've seen marshal services who were after somebody because they're a felon who's in possession of a gun. Whole different story. But nevertheless, we've seen shootouts occur where 1 or 2 people get in a shootout with law enforcement, and 4 or more, they meet the magic number for the Gun Violence Archive, so the Gun Violence Archive calls it a mass shooting. That's just silly and stupid. Because, as I always say, the media is trying to make it look like we have an epidemic. Why would you include law enforcement related shootouts with mass shootings to make people think there's an epidemic that we might get caught up in? It's very unusual for me to be in trouble with law enforcement. So it's very unlikely that I'll ever be included in that. And if you have the good guys and the bad guys shooting at each other and it's law enforcement initiated, in other words, that maybe what caused the shootout, not saying it's their fault, but they're approaching a known felon or a person on the lam or running from the law, may have initiated that shootout and triggered it and started it. Maybe that shootout would have never happened if law enforcement wouldn't have been trying to apprehend them. I'm not making excuses for either side. I'm telling you, this is a type of shooting that should not be in here. I don't believe it's a classifiable type of shooting like the other 3 that I mentioned. I think the other 3 are accurate, but it's important that I put that in here just because we have a place to capture them, because I don't want to throw them in one of the other 3 buckets just for the sake of doing it. I literally capture every single one of these shootings and talk about every single one. So there's a bucket I have to put them in, and here lately I've been having to put them in the law enforcement bucket. Again, that's an incorrect bucket. Guys, I hope you enjoyed that. I think it's really important that we understand what goes through a person's mind when they determine that they are going to take a human life. I think that if we take the lazy route, as most people are doing, and we just put them all into one bucket and we say, oh, guns are a problem, we're taking the easy way out, we're taking the lazy way out. And in many cases, they're purposely doing that, right, to mislead the American public. I feel like if we truly want to stop these, help these, slow these, whatever, you have to approach it like I'm approaching it. You cannot look at the tool being used, because the mind arrived at the decision to take another human life well before, in many cases, they decided, I'm going to use a gun to do this, or I'm going to use a car to do this, or a knife to do this. How we got to that point is way more important than what they used.
God save the Queen, man.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America. He's so